I'm Kylie Jean, and I'm so excited that you're here with me today. And today I wanted to talk about times and seasons. I've had a lot of really unique opportunities, and if you were to look at my life on paper, it would definitely seem a little bit more rare. But when we get to operate in partnership with the Holy Spirit, there's a joy and no limitations. And being able to let loose of the way that we think something is gonna kind of play out, roll out for careers, for family, for different opportunities. And so I kind of wanted to dive into that a little bit today.
Did they catch me on my way up? Watch me, not slowing down, and I'm not saying sorry.
Well, I was looking here in Ecclesiastes. What's a tongue mouthful? Ecclesiastes 3. And it says right here, it says, there is a time for everything, a season for every activity that's under the sun, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to tear down, and a time to build. There's times for weeping, there's a time to laugh, there's times for mourning, and there's times for dancing, a time for scattered stones, and a time to gather them. There's a time to embrace, and there's a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search, and a time to give up, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to mend, a time to be silent, and a time to speak, a time to hate, and a time of war, and a time of peace. And I know there's a lot of different times mentioned here, but I think this just so beautifully encapsulates that there's different moments within the seasons of our life that allow us to be activated in different aspects of what the Lord has for us. And to be able to fully explore, what are these times and seasons that placate in our lives? What are these areas that are the very real God-given desires of our heart that have been placed there for a specific reason and a specific purpose? And how do we figure out how to balance it all? How do we figure out, when do we know that we want to pursue one thing, and when is the time for the other to step forth? When is it time to let go of something? When is it time to readjust the vision? We've talked a lot about vision in the past. When is the time to readjust the vision and to move forward in different things? And I think that that's where we have this incredible opportunity to kind of step back and connect the dots on our life, to ask the Lord some really good questions, and to live in full submission of what merits that specific season of our life.
I love that you're talking about this, because season is another one of those Christianese words.
Yeah, you're right.
That gets tossed around, and I feel like it's been abused. Sorry to the word seasons.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people use that like, oh, I'm just in a season of busyness right now, or I'm in a season of this. And it can get a little bit eye-rolly when you're like, okay, you're always in a season of turmoil.
Totally.
But I think another thing, too, is there can be seasons within seasons.
Absolutely.
And so what I love about that Ecclesiastes verse, first, I'm an Ecclesiastes girl.
I know you are.
A lot of people hate Ecclesiastes. For me, it puts everything into perspective, and to genuinely be like, what is the point? But in a way where it's like, fear God, do what he tells you. That's how it ends. That's Ecclesiastes 12:13. Fear God, do what he tells you. Mm-hmm. That's what life is. And so even in the midst of seasons that feel pointless or really hard, the perspective is, in the end, we're just living our lives for God.
Yeah, I think a really easy, practical breakdown, because you're exactly right. Seasons have become such a buzzword. I think we'd even ran into somebody at Whole Foods at one point, and he said something about a season, and it was like, okay, it's a little buzzwordy.
I feel like John Chris needs to do. He probably has one. Seasons.
I would think so. I think a way to even just recognize what constitute a season. It's usually this frame of time that either can have a very legitimate time frame to it. Hey, I know that while I'm in this job, or let's say I've worked a lot of contracts. Contracts usually have a beginning date and they have an end date. Mm-hmm. And I know that while I'm in the time frame of that contract, it is a season of X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of recognizing a season. I think another way of recognizing a season is you start to feel internal shifts in things. And we can realize, sometimes we have really easy, clear doors that have been opened. They're in alignment with the way that I've chosen to grow my life forward. There's some things that are only God explained open doors, and then there's other times where it's the natural progression of the way that we've kind of moved forward in different ways of career or family, or different times and place and seasons. And then when you can start to feel that shift, it's usually because a grace is lifted. Mm-hmm. Or maybe huge. There's a discrepancy internally that you can't quite put your finger on, but what once used to be second nature super easy. It carried a lot of joy. Maybe that circumstance has shifted a little bit. It's changed. And then you can start to step back and realize like, oh, I wonder if this time frame, I wonder if this season that I've been in is changing. And it's always unto something. Nothing that we've ever done has ever been done in vain. I think this was a huge revelation for me because I've had so many seasons and transitions in my life. I remember somebody said something like, well, you're in a transition. I was like, that word is lost on me at this point. Like, it feels like life is just always has transition in it. And so it's recognizing, okay, nothing is lost. Everything builds unto something. Each experience is putting tools in our tool belt, so to speak, that we get to call upon and use at different moments of our life. We're building an endurance. We're building a strength, a tact, a tenacity. We're growing our lives personally, but we're also stretching our comfort zones. And what does life look like in the different work surroundings? Or when is it time to have a family? When is it time to look like, you know, that's going to take the forefront a little differently? I know we've been in this time frame where it's been a lot of incredible work opportunities and building into that, but then naturally hardwired, I can at least speak for myself, like naturally hardwired in us is this opportunity to have the generations come forth. And so you can start to feel like, oh, there's a shifting of the seasons. And I'm really excited for when that comes to the forefront. And that'll make work look really different for me. So you can start to like kind of recognize, okay, where do things start to feel like they're changing? And that is an indicator in your season.
Can you help me understand if there is a season that I'm really yearning for in life and I don't know how to get there? Or sometimes they're out of our control. Like, what does that look like when I want to start a family? Or what does that transition look like? Do you have any advice for that?
That's really good and also can be really hard to answer.
I know. Gotcha.
It's very abstract. Well, I guess I can just speak like personally. I think a huge key is sometimes we're really, really close to something. We're really close to a desire in our heart and we can feel the change, but we don't even know what we're changing into. Or like we can feel like, hey, what has been kind of feels like it's coming to an end, but I don't exactly see what's next. And I think that is where faith is a huge component and just learning to be a whole nother level of trusting in the heart of the Lord and realizing that, okay, even when I can't see this for myself, I'm going to trust you. We've talked in the past about how powerful our words are. For me personally, there's moments where I have to say out loud so that my ears can hear my mouth say, okay, Lord, I trust you. Like this feels really uncomfortable. I have no idea what's next. My heart's desire is this next season, but all the elements that can make that happen are completely outside of my control. So I'm choosing to trust you. I just fully am surrendering to what that looks like. Show me my next step. How do I move forward? The Bible's really clear that he always brings confirmation, and the Lord loves it when we ask him for things. You have not because you ask not. And so I think having that dialogue with the Lord of, okay, Lord, can you give me confirmation in this area?
What do you do when you don't feel like you have that?
That's a really good question. I think one, we all get these different opportunities where I think the Lord can be really, really easy. I can say for my experience, when I've had really, really cool work opportunities, it can be easy for what would be out of the ordinary for other people to be your baseline of every day. And that can become a comfort zone. And I think that there's moments that the Lord wants to so take us outside of our comfort zone that it is literally blind trust. It is impossible for me to do this out of my own strength. It's impossible for me to do this out of my own gifting. So all that I have right now is being completely emptied of myself and learning that I just have to totally trust you and lean into what my next directional move is, Lord. And that can be really uncomfortable. Most of the time it is. It can be really vulnerable, but that is building inside of us something that can never be taken away. It's building, learning how to tune in to the voice of the Lord and the presence of his Spirit to be able to move forward in obedience in times where it feels like we're walking really blind. I think the Lord's really kind, and he'll also bring people to speak confirmations and affirmations into our life, whether that's people who know us the best, or even sometimes it's a word from a stranger. I've gotten over and over again where somebody out of the blue will say something that completely confirms something I had felt like internally the Lord was speaking to me, or a decision that I had to make. And so I think it's learning to realize, one, the Lord is always speaking. Like, there is actually no limitations in the way that he speaks. It's just us being open enough, yielding our hearts, yielding our spirits to be able to receive the way that he's speaking. He'll speak through people. He'll speak through circumstance. You might turn on your car and there's a lyric of a song that grabs you differently. I remember years ago I had a boss and I was feeling something in a relationship, and my boss, literally in passing, I asked him a question and he said, I never stayed in a relationship past its time. And he would have no idea that that was confirming something to me. And I went, oh, I think I've been in this past its time. And that was a confirming word for me at the moment.
That's good.
In every area of our life, the Lord will always bring a confirmation. And we just have to be open enough and tuned in enough to be able to receive that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it in the outside, he always is confirming through his word.
And I think another very practical thing, sometimes I am totally with you. The Lord's always speaking and you hear him in the daily.
Yeah.
I mean, and then minute by minute, if you're in conversation with the Holy Spirit, we have access to that. And sometimes you're asking a really big question, or you're trying to figure out a big move or a big pivot in your life, what that looks like. And I know you've done this. Sometimes the practical advice is, if you are not hearing where to go next, go back to the last word you did hear and see if that's finished.
Yeah.
Did you close the chapter on that? And you have a real life example with finishing your degree.
Yeah. So when I went back to college later, because my grandma really expressed that it was important to her, my grandfather, that I finish my degree, which in my life, it was not necessary because I always worked really great jobs. But it was a crazy story in the way it all unfolded. And all I heard the Lord say was to finish my degree for 2 years. Wow. That is the consistent of what he would speak to me. And it got really frustrating because I love tuning into what the Lord has to say. And I had a lot of opportunities that came across my path in that time frame that were really good career opportunities that seemed crazy to turn down. But I knew in my spirit and in my heart, all the Lord was saying was finish your degree. And I was like, okay. And it was not an easy route. There was a lot of dynamics that happened. It was supposed to take a year. It took 2 years. Things that were supposed to be accepted by the university all of a sudden weren't. There was tons of staff changeover. So it was like constantly my life experience, all these things were under review. And it was very frustrating in the natural because I really had to learn how to operate within systems that felt to me like they were making life a little bit more difficult. But I had to learn how to be authentically myself in a system that was not me. And in that process, all the Lord was saying was finish your degree. My final day of turning in my degree, I ended up getting an invitation where I was at a very exclusive invite, was like one of 30 people at a round table, that ended up actually being what thrusted me forward into political media, into journalism, into everything that's flowing in my life right now, came from 2 years of the Lord speaking one word: finish your degree. And those 2 years was a internal grind for me. And it was an opportunity to learn to trust when things seemed like they were going backwards in my life. When you've worked, I've been in the entertainment industry since I was 15. I worked careers that people had worked their whole entire adult lives to get. It felt very backwards to me to go back into a classroom. And the Lord used that, and it created something inside of me that was needed. So it's going back to what is that last thing that he told you, and being okay with if he's only telling you this one little thing, even though it doesn't make sense, or it, for me, caused a lot of internal frustration. It was like the moment that I leaned in and yielded to that was when all of a sudden an unexplainable opportunity came along, and my career went so much further than if I were to have gone the traditional route, or would have gone like the way that I should have gone on paper. But it was because of obedience. It yielded an opportunity.
I think my favorite word picture with this is the drawing back of the arrow. Mm-hmm. If you're the arrow and you just keep getting, you said it felt like you're going backwards. Like you're just getting pulled further.
Yeah.
Further. You know your target is, you can see it, and yet you keep getting further and further away from it. And you're like, this makes no sense. Why do I keep getting further from my target? And it took you 2 years for that arrow to be pulled back.
Yeah.
And let go. But once it was let go, it had been pulled back so far.
Yeah.
You had that much more power and energy going into it. And I feel like that's the launch.
Yeah.
Like you waited 2 years for a launch to happen in an hour.
Yes.
In an hour event. And it launched your entire next trajectory of your life,
Right.
decade especially, but
Right.
moving forward. And so I think we've had a lot of arrow moments.
Yes.
I think this country is in a huge arrow
I
moment.
think you're right.
The church is in a huge arrow moment. And I think it's just, and it's not that everything's always in an arrow moment, but there's definitely a time where everything is culminating right now.
Absolutely.
And I've been saying last couple weeks, with all these hurricanes that have been going on, is it feels like there's a tidal wave coming.
Yeah.
And in order for a tidal wave to hit, the waters draw out.
Yeah.
And as the waters draw out, it exposes.
Yes.
It dries.
Yes.
It changes the landscape. It
Yeah.
looks different than the shore's gone.
Yep.
Or the shore's there.
It's there.
And it's there extra.
Yeah.
And it takes that drawing back in order for it to completely be washed over.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that feels like a really big, scary, dominated thing. But
Right.
sometimes it's exactly what we need. Because we need that wave to come over us and wash us.
Right.
And wipe the slate clean and start new again.
I agree. And I think it's really easy to get in rhythms of systems that can work up to a certain point in time, but then they can keep us held back. And so it takes that opportunity to be able to be like flexible and fluid and realizing like, oh, it is that adjustment with like the arrow going back and being yielded to the process of what that looks like.
Right. You know what else happens when you pull an arrow back? Is you can make the tiniest directional change and it'll throw the arrow a mile off.
Right.
Maybe not an actual mile, but it's in that drawing back where you can make the tiniest pivot in your vision, in your foundation. Just the tiniest little pivot. Once that arrow launches, it's in a completely different elevation.
Yeah.
And I think it's noticing that it doesn't take much. If you're in an arrow drawing back season, to really pay attention to what little changes are happening, because those can change the trajectory of your entire life.
Absolutely. And it can do it on both sides, on what brings you forward and then what can keep you stuck a little bit. I remember I recently I love like journaling with the Lord, and I saw this whole picture and I realized, oh, like, you know how much energy that the enemy has to put in to try to pivot us just a little bit? Because we're just pivoted a little bit, we won't go to the fullness of the bullseye of the target. And so I think that's in those yielding points and being able to be okay with the unknown process of the pulling back and the full submission and hands up that allows for that arrow to strike the target every single time.
We've been talking also about times, and I think to pivot a little bit, we live in different timelines, right? We have our physical body, earthly timeline, and then there's also a kingdom spiritual timeline.
Yeah.
Right? God is outside of time.
Yeah.
I saw a video recently once that was talking about the screw tape letters. And they were saying in it, like, the one way that you can distract people the most is either get them to think about their past, which causes them to get stuck in a depression because they're only thinking about things that could have been differently. If you can't get them to think about their past, get them to think about their future, because then that makes them anxious, because then they're trying to control what the future looks like.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like the demon talking to whoever. And so they said the worst thing you can do is let your person be present.
Yeah.
Because now what I've come to understand with our timelines is if you have the kingdom timeline and then the earthly timeline, it's like they bend and they meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And if this is the past and this is the future, the present is the only place that can touch the kingdom. And the present is where you hear from God. That's where your spirit is directly connected. That's where you actually are in unison with the spirit. So if you're thinking about the future and you're anxious and you want to control what's happening, or you're worried about what's happening, or if you're in the past, you're not able to connect to the physical time that God has us in. And if you can connect to that, that's life-changing. Because again, God can do in a second.
Yeah.
He can do in a second that would take us years or decades to
Yeah.
do. It just takes one click in the spirit.
Yep.
So it's important to be present and to pay attention to what he's saying, because if you follow him, you won't miss it.
You'll hit every single time.
Every single time.
That's why it says, like, do not worry about tomorrow, for today brings enough of its own. And even our physical bodies,
Ecclesiastes.
or in body, soul, and spirit. I remember learning this. We have a kinesiologist friend, and actually that's how people become so depleted in their thyroid, because the thyroid produces enough for what's today. And so when we start worrying about things, like, our body actually gets physically depleted of the things that it has for today.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
That there's such a tie to the spiritual and the natural.
Right, because we're body, soul, and spirit. And that's just the way the Lord has created us. It is such a multifaceted way that we get to live our lives. And we're not like taught like that. We're not taught like that in school. Nobody teaches it. Church doesn't teach
Church
it.
does not teach that.
Nope, they don't. Well, that's a whole
God
other topic
is
of
3 in
itself.
1. We are 3 in 1.
Yeah, we have. It's so wild. And so it's super cool when you start to untap these revelations and you realize like, oh, there's such a bigger like mode of operation that I get to choose to live my life out of, because it's not just this one element. It's something else that kind of affects everything else. And I remember even words have the power to bring life and death. I like did this whole study on the power of words and like our physical body, and the way like my entire senior thesis was on it. It was so fascinating to read these medical journals and these scientific journals that back up what scripture tells us. And the only thing that can actually, I read this, so I need to go fact check myself again. But when I was doing all the research, I remember I came across this study, and it said that the only thing that could actually repair our own physical DNA was our voice speaking to our body. Like it carries that much authority that there is no other option but for your body to respond. So even if somebody, like if a doctor or somebody gives you like a diagnosis for something, your body will actually respond to your voice over the voice of the diagnosis over you. So that's why it's so powerful what you come into agreement with. What you speak over your own life. I'm speaking over my body. I'm speaking over my future, my current circumstances. It is a huge key that unlocks things, which is super exciting.
One of the first books I read as I was kind of getting on this journey of wholeness and spirituality and like learning who I was supposed to be, is called Get a Grip on Your Lip.
Oh, nice.
I forget who wrote it, but it changed my life. A very simple book, but heavy.
Yeah.
Simple but heavy. And she broke down phrases that we say just in our English vernacular.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's a pain in my neck. Or those kinds of things. But they have such power that our ears hear us say those. And then pain can actually manifest in our necks.
Yeah.
It's like they've done studies where people say these phrases over and over. Oh, it makes me sick to my stomach. Like, why do so many of our phrases include our body parts?
Right? Because like there's so much emotion, there's things that attach, and it'll like show itself in places like if you carry stress in your shoulders or whatever it might be. Like it's wild how everything is ultimately connected.
How many of our problems are like self-inflicted?
So many because of our words, and then that will actually showcase itself in the times and the seasons that we're in.
Right.
Because there's moments where, I mean, I've been in different times where it's just been grueling, even hours that I've had to like work a job, and you feel completely depleted, and that speaks into the time in the season. You might realize like, hey, I'm looking to reshape my vision a little bit here. I'm looking to see what might be coming after this, because this is on a road to burnout. It's unsustainable. And so I think the kindness of the Lord, it goes back to the original question of like, what are some indicators? Like, how do you know when there's like a shift in things? I think we can even listen to our bodies.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's huge. We can see like, okay, well, what's playing in that? Like, if you're married and thinking about starting a family, like there's usually this intuition that kicks in, this like desire to be like starting a family. Like it's tuning into those little things that are such indicators to the times and the seasons that are at play, and how out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And we can see, oh, what is like actually like playing out in me right now? And how is that playing into this next season time frame of my life? And you are fully equipped, even in the moments where it feels like it makes no sense that I'm here. It is exciting and shocking to see what comes forth, because I think, and I've experienced in my personal life, where the Lord has placed me in things that were outside of my comfort zone, made no sense if you were to look at my qualifications, yet it brought out something inside of me that I didn't even know existed unless I was put in such uncomfortable dynamics. And He'll use that to reveal things that are probably hindering us and could be let go. And He'll use it to bring forth the best that's inside of us. And so I think that's what gets me really excited when talking about times and seasons in our life, and being able to be on the adventure of navigating those. Sometimes it's not fun in the moment, but we can look back and we can celebrate and see how clearly the Lord had marked them, that they're unto something. And learning these things that we've been talking about, we get to pick up these tools along the way. We get the opportunity to dive in to health. You get the opportunity to dive in to different work environments, to building families. There's a time and a season for everything, and we get the opportunity to fully explore that and have fun with it with the Lord.
And I think it's important too, once you have this understanding of how times and seasons operate, which is a biblical law and a physical law, is we've been talking very future casting, like aiming for dreams
Right.
and pulling vision in and like expecting the next season to come. And sometimes seasons get thrust upon you.
Right.
Sometimes you get launched into a season.
Totally.
Sometimes you get let go from your job.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Speaking from experience.
We've all been there.
If you've never been fired, you're not doing something right.
We've all been there.
But sometimes things happen. And I think when you have these biblical principles of things that happen, you understand you can go into the next season with a
Right.
little more peace, a little more grace. I'm a big believer in grace.
Yeah.
Grace comes upon you and grace gets lifted.
Yeah.
You'll love something one day. Me, I'm not saying about you.
Yeah.
I'll love something one day and the next week the grace is gone. I'm like, "Whoop. Okay, what I had patience for, what I had excitement
Right.
for, what I had faith for.
Right.
Sometimes those things lift and you think, oh, maybe my time is done.
Right.
I love something that really taught me the concept of it, really wrapped my brain around it, was the way that your parents have talked about church.
I grew up in a household that really cultivated learning to hear God's voice. And so because of just my parents and their heart, and like they are so connected with people, and they love the Lord more than anything. And that's really the temperature of our household that they created. But they've gotten the opportunity to be a part of a ton of different churches throughout their life in different seasons. And we all kind of realized like, oh, like there's normally not one place to plug into all the time. They come in times and seasons of our lives because of what that is to bring to your life and because of what you actually have to bring to that place. And it's just in the same with like relationships and friendships. Like you said earlier, there's people who come in time frames and they're there for the long haul, and there's people who come in different seasons and it shifts differently in and out, and it's a gift, and sometimes they loop back because you never know what you have to bring that intersects with a culture, a workplace, a church setting, a governmental setting, a friendship, and you don't know how long that season is to be.
And for me, that kind of takes away sometimes it can be hard to let things go. And I think realizing that churches are for seasons.
Yeah.
Like not everybody, some people are maybe. Some people are called to a church their entire lives.
Yeah.
But most people probably aren't.
Yeah.
And I think there's changes, and sometimes we change jobs and we change cities and our families change and our
Right.
friend groups change and our goals change. And so it's really marking to me to say, oh, seasons are natural.
Totally.
Change is good.
Yeah.
Sometimes we look at it as like, oh, something's changing, that's a bad thing. That means like our normal is shifting. And I think that's how you grow life.
Absolutely.
Before that would have scared me to say, oh, like I can commit. I will be in this for the rest of forever.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is actually just fear talking.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, I don't want to leave because I'm comfortable.
Right.
I don't want to have to deal with what it looks like to do something. But when I realized that, oh, churches can be in seasons.
Yeah.
Jobs can be in seasons.
Right.
Relationships can be in seasons.
Right.
It makes you be able to hold them with open hands.
Yeah.
Because then you're not gripping them because you love them so much or because you're committed. It really keeps it open-handed, and I always love this. Yeah. You can hold more sand with an open hand.
Right.
The more you squeeze it, the more sand you lose.
Right.
And it's a volume thing. So if you can live life open-handed, you're actually able to handle so much more.
Yeah.
That was a lot of good hand puns, but
It was really good.
you can handle them.
And again, I think it's like a lot of that, we're all so unique. Mm-hmm. And what works for one person isn't going to be the same road that the Lord calls us all on. And so I think it's recognizing that, and it is living that loose-handed.
I forgot to say,
Yes.
knowing that things can have good endings
Yeah.
helps me realize that things can be left with honor.
Mm-hmm.
Things can be left with respect. That just because one season ends, just because you get fired from your job,
Right.
doesn't mean that it was a lost experience.
Right.
And I think knowing that seasons have endings give honor, and they give respect, and they give place to what you did have. And it
Yeah.
helps you to be grateful for whatever that was and move into the next.
Yeah, that's so
The
good.
last thing you want is to move on with hatred or
Right.
any kind of negative feeling that's going to weigh you down. You
Right.
want to be able to say thank you and Marie Kondo it. Thank you for the joy. And
Yeah.
and move on, because I feel like that's just a way to live whole.
I think so. And I think it's sometimes it's really easy to be really hard on ourselves. And I've been there plenty of times, and realizing in most circumstances, you do the best that you can do in that moment.
Always.
You're navigating the best that you can in those moments. And it can be easy, like what you said earlier, to get stuck in the past and how you wish some things that you even yourself, that you tackled them or approached them differently. Yeah. The reality is like that already happened. Mm-hmm. You have to take that, learn and grow from it. And then we have the opportunity to not repeat it in that way in the next time and season.
What a gift.
What a gift.
Redo.
Redo. So I think that All of these things are opportunities that the Lord gives us to be able to grow our lives, to be able to tune in into him and realize sometimes you hold both. Like I said in Ecclesiastes, there's a time and there's a season for truly everything. And plugging into what does that look like for me right now? What does that look like in the way I'm going to lead my family? What does that look like in the way that I navigate my job, in my friend circle, in my relationships? And I think if we can be loose-handed enough, yet tethered to the heart of the Lord and the vision that he's put before you, you're only going to win. Not everything will ever be executed perfectly, because perfection is not the goal. But the goal is to grow, to enjoy life, and to keep moving forward and navigating in the best that we can in relationship with the Holy Spirit. It's always a win.
They catch me on my way up, watch me, not slowing down and I'm not saying sorry. Keep on fighting.